So I did mine over child abuse and children with special needs. So a little background on it. It is generally believed that children with disabilities are abused more frequently than children in general populations. Um, in 1993, the National Center of Child Abuse and Neglect research found that children with disabilities are abused 1.7 times more than other children. Most children with disabilities are abused because of society's responses to their disability, less likely than the disability itself, which meaning like the disability itself does not diminish how they go throughout society, but the way that society treats them is how causes abuse for children with disabilities. And child abuse reports for children with disabilities are usually not supported with enough information on the case, like other child abuse cases. So the reports are kind of considered not trustworthy. So, some contributions to child abuse for children with disabilities would be an association between adverse childhood experiences, which is AKA ACEs, and it causes developmental delay. The CDC describes adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs, as potentially traumatic events that occur in a childhood 0 to 17 years, such as experience violence, abuse, neglect, witnessing violence in the home, or having a family member die or commit suicide. Um, ACEs have been linked to a lot of different things, such as low life potential, early death, chronic health conditions, and risky health behaviors. Some other contributions would be stressors, which was talked about a lot in a lot of the articles that I was reading. Um, Stressors are such a huge part of a child abuse and neglect on children with disabilities. Most factors leading to child abuse for children with disabilities is found to be similar to the general population, but there are some other stress factors that contribute more to families that have children with disabilities, which would be feeling unprepared to handle the care for the child with a disability, having more financial issues, or the stress of an additional financial contribution like medical bills, medicine, etc., lacking social support or networks for family and friends, and other things would be sometimes is linked to high divorce rates, which I talked about in the article on how a parent, like caregiver's relationship, should be extremely strong to be able to handle such stress that comes along with having a child with disability, which having not a strong relationship between the caregivers can also cause the child to have ACEs and further have developmental delays in adulthood. So, my research articles that I did, the first one would be exploring risk for abuse of children with chronic conditions or disabilities. And this was the parents' perceptions of stressors and the role of professionals. So, the purpose of the research was to find out if children with chronic conditions or disabilities were at a higher risk for abuse. Svensson, Erickson, and Jansen conducted a study by doing in depth interviews with around 15 parents and children with a disability or chronic condition. During these interviews, a lot of parents stated that they were a lot harder on their children than they needed to be. And then my second article, I did child maltreatment and autism spectrum disorder, and intellectual disability results from a population based sample. I picked this one just because it was more specific on a disorder, but also talked about intellectual disabilities as well and how those reacted together. So in this study, it discussed the risk factors for abuse in children with disabilities. Children with developmental disabilities are at higher risk for abuse. A child who has intellectual disability, or autism spectrum disorder, or both, have higher odds of proving abuse um, occurring. So overall, abuse in children with autism spectrum disorder was linked to hyperactivity, aggression, and temper tantrums. And then in the middle, I have this picture that pretty much just talks about the three things of risk for abuse, which is the relationship between the parent and child. And then down here would be the professional support and social norms. So being able to have those professional support groups and your social support groups with all of this, with the lack of that, are high risk for abuse. But with all of these having a positive impact in that life, it can prevent the abuse later on. So my final research article was association between adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs, and developmental delay of preschool children in a rural area of Colombia. So experiencing traumatic events, ACEs, that is at an early age, was a huge focus on this study because it wanted to see how children uh, when they got older, can become developmentally delayed from experiencing these traumatic events in their childhood. They conducted a study by using surveys and interviews with parents. An ACEs interview is pretty much conducted of a bunch of questions, and at the end, you can receive a score. The score, if it's 4 or higher, shows that a child is at a higher risk for developmental delay. So over here, I have a picture of it because it also, ACEs doesn't just do developmental delay, it also does, as you can see, historical trauma, social conditions, childhood experiences, and then it goes up and up to social emotional, adoption, disease, disability, and early death. So ACEs is used to pretty much summarize overall traumatic events and how they can lead to depression or bipolar disorder and things in that nature. Uh, so I wanted to focus more on why ACEs is important. So I have this video, and it's only 60 seconds. So we're going to do that. Okay, so I picked that video because it pretty much just gave an overall summary of the importance of ACEs. Some of the key facts that I took out of that is 1 out of 6 adults experience 4 or more types of ACEs, which is like a different type of category. And then 5 out of 10 of the top leading causes of death are associated with ACEs. And lastly, preventing ACEs could reduce the number of adults with depression by 44%, which I think is a huge thing. And not only just focusing on children with disabilities, of course, they're going to be the main focus just because they are extremely vulnerable. But it's also the fact of children as a whole. We have to focus on the traumatic events that they could experience throughout their childhood that could cause them to end up having depression and anxiety and bipolar disorder. And so having all of these things mixed up, they're at a higher risk as well of child abuse, sexual abuse, mental, emotionally, physically. So that's why I wanted to focus mostly on ACEs. But my reference page is on the next page right here. And thank you so much.